media for the past few years has had a strange relationships with politics. Filmmakers, game developers, and other artists will create their product, write it out, and swear up and down to their fans that their product is not political, even if the inspirations and messages in the story blatantly are. And typically, that message is met with applause. People cheer for pesky politics finally being detached from their entertainment, finally looking for a way to escape from such realities. What they don't realize, however, is that more often than not, these products still have political themes and messages, just not what the masses would consider the wrong politics. There are plenty of examples of this disowning of political content in order to drive cheap approval from both fans and shareholders alike. Stories that deal with heavy themes that we all relate to, how the government impacts our lives, yet in interviews and public statements, they reassure their audience that this isn't political. It's just... well, who knows? To us, it's nothing if not political. To them, it's whatever sells the most copies. There are hundreds of examples of this. Developers disavowing politics in their own product despite blatantly being there, and fans only encourage that. But there is one egregious example of this. 2019's Call of Duty Modern Warfare claimed the same thing despite its subject matter.
I don't think it's a political game.
Really?
Now, to their credit, they do acknowledge that some of the subject matter is inherently tied to politics, but the main crux of their argument that it is not political relies solely on the claim that they don't make a statement. They merely just show you the realities of the world, and it is up to you to find your stance on it. And defining what exactly political means is tricky, to say the least, but the interview does give their own.
If you wanted a situation where I would say that yes, it is a political story, I would have to be telling a story about specifically the exact administrations and governments and events in our world today. We are talking about thematic things. We would also have to have, I think, a perspective on it. And what we don't, we want to present the different perspectives. We don't want to say that one of them is correct.
This is all fair. On the surface, it sounds like an innocent enough goal. However, their own definition of political completely eliminates the possibility for allegory. According to them, so long as you don't talk about the literal government and Congress, this isn't a political game. And even then, I argue that they did not avoid their own definition of political. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is a political game that gives a perspective on modern war, despite what the developers claim. And these politics are serving as concerning propaganda, resulting in historical revisionism, the demonizing of other countries, and the glorification of US and UK imperialism, specifically targeting fans of the franchise by normalizing it.
Let's go. I have contacts posted just ahead. They'll have more explosives for us.
Despite their claim that no clear perspective is given, it is easily arguable that there is. And in order to contextualize everything, I will need to briefly summarize the plot of the game's story. This will be as brief as possible, only touching on the most important aspects, such as characters, locations, and events. The game takes place in the modern era, focusing around the fictional Middle Eastern country of Urzikstan. Characters include Alex, a CIA soldier assisting the Marines, Kyle Garrick, an SAS newbie, Captain Price, a seasoned SAS soldier, Farah and Hadir, siblings leading a rebellion against invading Russian forces in Urzikstan, the Wolf and the Butcher, leading figures in the fictional terrorist group Al-Qatala, and General Barkov, the man behind the Russian invasion. Russia has been invading the region for years, trying to cleanse what they are quoted as calling
This country is a breeding ground for terrorists.
They develop chemical weapons in order to assist with that. Meanwhile, Garrick and Price both operate in London, tracking a group of Al-Qatala soldiers into a public space. Garrick asks for clearance to take him out, and he is denied. What results is a terrorist attack, their car detonating. Men with guns and suicide bombers alike swarm the streets and take time to clear out, resulting in dozens of innocent lives taken. Garrick talks with Price after the attack about how the attack could have been prevented. The rest of the story focuses on fighting Al-Qatala and Barkov with the assistance of Farah's rebel group. During the story, however, Farah's brother Hadir betrays the group, though not at all directly. He turns the Russians' chemicals against them, crossing a personal line.
Russian gas?
Yes! And now we send it back to the Russians!
After that moment, Hadir is shunned by both the story itself and by the characters. Farah does not even think for a moment before she goes from thinking of him as a loving brother to a...
Hadir! Hadir!
Stop!
Manek!
Stop, Farah! Stop!
You can't be with it!
The story continues on from there. Hadir is captured and locked up elsewhere, likely waiting to pop back up for a sequel. General Barkov and the Wolf are both killed, and the world avoids World War III. And the group proves that when they are given the individual authority to execute their actions based on their judgment, that it is for the betterment of the world. Now that that is through, the finer details of the story can be examined to explain why it is unavoidably political, focusing on the perspective the story takes. The developers claim that the story does not do this, but simply put, that is nearly impossible. At least when telling a conventional story like this game tells. There are perspectives that all lend themselves to the same message, starting with Farah. As a child, she witnessed the same gas Hadir turns on the Russians used on her own town, in a harrowing section of the game where you have to play through her perspective. Both you as a player and her witnessed the impact the gas has. Children lay dead in the street. Dogs are whimpering and twitching on the floor. Russians with gas masks come in to brutally finish any stragglers. As a mere child, she was at risk of having a bullet put in her or choking on chlorine. It makes sense that she would turn on Hadir for resorting to the same tactics, even if those weapons were taken from the Russians. What the story doesn't seem to address, however, is that this is a perspective. A clear one. They portray Farah as 100% in the right, a victim of foreign invaders that the story ultimately rewards, despite that going against the definition set for what would make a political story. Another perspective is Kyle Garrick's. Garrick starts the game off by tracking down an Al-Qatala squad for weeks. When he isn't given the authority to engage them before they can cause harm, they do just that. He's put in a position where he has to open fire, the player in his shoes likely accidentally hitting civilians as he attempts to get the situation under control with the SAS and police. After the dust is settled, he vents to Captain Price.
You saved lives today, Sergeant.
This shouldn't have happened in the first place, sir. They sent us in half-assed, so everyone could just keep pretending we're not at war.
Yeah, like the fucking century, that is.
Why have we got our hands tied? Let's just take the bloody gloves off and fight. Sir.
Go on.
We don't stand a chance in hell with these rules of engagement, Captain. They can tell us where, they can tell us when. Don't tell us how. My men were tracking that cell for weeks.
The game does not literally force you to agree with Garrick here, but it would be hard to disprove the message it is trying to display here in the context of the game's world. Garrick did not have executive authority, and that resulted in innocent lives being taken. He is proven correct by the story on every count that if he had that autonomy and didn't need to listen to his higher-ups, then that attack would not have happened. And never does the story try to say otherwise, grounding its message and making it clear in what it believes. What a story tries to tell you will always rely on the perspective from which it is told, and this perspective tells us that soldiers deserve more autonomy, or else the worst is bound to happen. There is also perspective with in-game events taking place, not just around the characters. The mission Clean House was one of the biggest pieces surrounding the marketing of the game, featured in numerous advertisements. Rather than a fast-paced, explosive mission, this one takes a quiet approach. Garrick and Price take an SAS squad and conduct a raid on a house suspected to claim intelligence on the location of Al-Qatala's leader, the Wolf. You climb in and slowly stalk your way through the building, clearing each floor one at a time. Most of the people in this building are hostile. Some are innocent. The squad holds up the innocent people and eliminates the terrorists with cold, calculated precision. At the top of the building is a woman, a laptop, and a detonator. Either Garrick or Price ends up shooting her dead. If they had not done that, everything would have been lost. All the soldiers in the home would have died, and the captured civilians, a baby included. And again, the perspective for this mission matters here. There are real-life operations like this, and you can be personally horrified that soldiers would be given the authority to breach in your home and kill anyone they deem hostile. You can argue that if you woke up at night only to see people with guns stalking through your halls, a reasonable reaction would be to attempt to defend yourself. But you would be at odds with the message the game is trying to deliver to the audience. Because in the end, this house turned out to be a treasure trove. There was intelligence within the attic that leads straight to the wolf's hiding place, which is then passed on to the Marines and CIA. The characters having the authority to execute this mission worked out in their favor, and just like the terrorist attack on London, it is backed up by the story that they either wanted the right thing or that they did the right thing. A message which is undoubtedly political in nature, given with how it has to do with the military.
We've got a location on the wolf.
Everything they do here and throughout the entire story is justified, because without it, something worse would have happened, according to the narrative. Even the toughest actions like raiding a civilian home, shooting panicked men and women, or Price throwing a bomb-strapped civilian away from others to his doom so that the rest may live.
He's got this. I want to tell me. I want to go. Look, open! I want to see my family. I want to see. Can you help him?
I'm trying.
Let me see my girl. It's going off.
I can't get it.
No time! Help me! Help me! Wait! What are you doing? No! No!
They are tough actions, but according to the story, it's what the strong must be willing to do. And according to this story, the strong are the brave soldiers of the US, UK, and their extremely cooperative allies. But it's a whole different question when others do it.
Quickly, I'll cover us!
Russian, yes?
Yes! And now we send it back to the Russians!
Earlier, I talked about Farah and Hadim, two of the Urzikstan rebels fighting against Al-Qatala and the Russian invaders. Hadim is outcast from the group and labeled a terrorist, however, when he uses the Russians' chemical weapons against themselves. Given Farah's backstory, it is absolutely understandable why she would hate this. Hell, it's a valid reason for anyone to hate chemical warfare. It's absolutely terrible both for the people it is used on and the environment. However, the game never really takes a stance against chemical warfare. It's even a tool you can mindlessly use in the multiplayer mode, devoid of context and consequence. No, the narrative merely hides behind it for a while to give the story a reason to villainize Hadim. But why? Why is someone like Captain Price deemed a hero in the eyes of the narrative when he makes difficult, risky decisions while Hadim is demonized for it? To get to that answer, another scene will need to be explained to fully contextualize the point. When I was playing the game, I was going through the story beats all the way up until the mission Old Comrades. Price and Garrick track down a recurring villain known as the Butcher, who was the Wolf's right-hand man before he was killed. They capture the Butcher and bring him to a warehouse where they proceed to interrogate him. Nothing seems to break him up until that point, so Price directed me, Garrick, to fetch a package. I opened the door to the trunk of a car to find a deathly afraid woman and child. I fetch them out and make them go to the room. It turns out that this is the Butcher's wife and son. Price warns Garrick that he does not need to witness what is about to happen firsthand, prompting me to choose whether I will participate in the interrogation or if I will just sit it out. I choose to participate, stepping in the room. We put bags over the woman and boy's heads and seat them. Then Captain Price warns me.
You want the gloves off? They're off.
Taking the gloves off being a frequent saying in this campaign, symbolizing getting dirty. Sometimes tough, but it's what Captain Price is willing to do. And it's what I'm about to do. Price hands me a revolver. The Butcher starts to beg me not to pull the trigger as I aim it at his wife's head, and personally, I was totally invested, thinking that this is when the story tips on its own head and flips everything back on the characters. What's worse is that I am the one in control right then. I'm the one who is making the conscious decision to put a gun right up to an innocent woman's head, tempted to pull the trigger the more the Butcher refuses to speak. And I'm thinking of where the story will go with my actions here, wondering what scars will be left on Garrick. and if he's willing to recognize that having the gloves off is going to result in casualties that could have been avoided otherwise. The butcher continues to refuse to talk, and I finally make a decision. I aim my gun at the woman's head and...
What the hell?
You pulled the hammer, Sergeant, not me.
The gun was never loaded. Price gave me an empty gun. The tension winds down as I wonder what will occur next until Price sets down a pile of bullets. I grab them and the butcher panics again, knowing for a fact that I not only had the will to pull the trigger on his wife, but now the gun is loaded. Personally, I'm horrified in all the right ways, thinking that this was where the game holds a mirror up to itself. Before I finish loading the weapon, the butcher spills the information. I walk out of there and Price and I leave. However, after that scene, it doesn't go the direction I was thinking of when the next scene begins. Rather than reflecting on the harm innocent people are coming to regardless of how this war is handled, the story takes a different approach.
Boss, what the hell are we doing here?
We're cleaning up a mess.
With women and children?
They were leverage.
They were
When
hostages.
you take the gloves off, you get blood on your hands, Kyle. That's how it works.
Where do we draw the line, sir?
You draw the line wherever you need it, Sergeant. At the end of the day, someone has to make the enemy scared of the dark. We get dirty, and the world stays clean. That's the mission. Now, if you're having second thoughts, then I can do this on my own.
No, sir. No second thoughts.
Good.
Rather than be horrified that the state would carry out such actions against civilians, the story wants to portray this act as heroic, arguing that soldiers shouldn't have to deal with morality on the battlefield because according to this, sometimes morals just have to be sidestepped in order to do the right thing. But how come Price and Garrick come out as shining heroes after torturing civilians and putting a gun up against an innocent woman and child's head, but Hadir is demonized? Well, it's simple. One of these difficult, upsetting acts was done with the approval of the US and/or UK government. They were given the green light to take the gloves off and therefore were rewarded with information as they constantly are through this narrative, and the other was done of Hadir's own accord. He doesn't cooperate with the CIA or SAS. He's willing to do whatever it takes to free his country from foreign invasion. It isn't the chemical weapons that made him a terrorist. It was a lack of obedience. I would be willing to bet that if Captain Price was ever forced to resort to chemical warfare, or maybe he interrogated an enemy with it somehow, it would not be portrayed as a terrible event. It would be yet another tough decision, one justified by the narrative and even shown off as being badass in the moment. And this is the part where I tell you that this did happen.
Look familiar.
No, please!
Where's Makarov? Tell me and it's yours.
Our contact with the man involved. We never met Makarov.
Where's their smoke?
Paris! He oversaw the delivery in Paris!
Right then. This is for the boys at Hereford.
This comparison is the absolute highlight of what Modern Warfare believes. This is a nationalist argument that states that American and British forces should have every right to take the gloves off and loosen the rules of engagement. Because even when it is tough, even when civilians are harmed, it is always portrayed as the correct decision in the end, regardless of what would be the fallout. And if anyone else does it outside of our approved circle, then they are our enemy. The terrorists that are brutal and lack mercy. We as people sitting comfortably at home don't recognize the morals that must be dropped when you're out on the battlefield, it seems to claim. If you can't torture civilians for the greater good, then you aren't Captain Price. You're not the hero that can call the toughest shots when they need to be. The reason that this argument used in this narrative is so concerning is because it normalizes a line of thinking we already see frequently in the unavoidably political real world.
What's happening?
Please, just don't hurt my son. We'll do what you say.
Here, Mama.
Don't be afraid, huh? Your mama's brave, boy.
Where are we going, Mama?
We are going to talk to some men, and then we will go home, okay? What you're doing is unforgivable. We are in...
The rules of engagement, the Geneva Conventions, they're there for a reason. And even when broken, we find that those who do can sometimes just slip past consequences, mainly to not dirty the image of the Army, Navy, Marines, SES, or whoever is under scrutiny at the time. One of Modern Warfare's mission takes place on the Highway of Death. In the game, it is an old highway in Urzikstan where the Russian forces fired at and bombed retreating militia soldiers. Civilians were on the highway as well. They still fired, resulting in a graveyard of cars and corpses of both soldiers and innocent people. Some of the soldiers were reportedly disarmed. In the real world, the Highway of Death is a 6-lane stretch of road between Iraq and Kuwait. The details are mostly similar besides the location, and the fact that in the game, Russians did it, when in real life, Americans did it. The game never addresses this, slipping just a bit too close to historical revisionism. The only plausible deniability being that the war crime with the same name just happens to be somewhere else in this world. Special Operations Chief Edward Gallagher of the Navy SEALs stabbed a young boy through the neck and chest multiple times until he died, just as he was receiving medical attention. Troopers around him reported that he sniped a little girl and an elderly man from a sniper nest. He would indiscriminately fire on houses with little to no reason. People tried reporting his deplorable war criminal behavior to the higher-ups. They reportedly told them to stop talking about it. He was detained in 2014 after trying to hit a Navy police officer with his car. Records show that he was not punished at all and received a promotion not too long after. He was described as being okay with killing anything that moved, according to fellow Iraq war veterans. Michael Behana was a former army lieutenant that stripped an Iraqi prisoner naked and proceeded to stab him to death. First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence ordered his men to engage with 3 civilians that were following orders to walk back to their motorcycle and move away from their position. They were shot at anyways. 2 of them died. The 3rd ran away. All 3 of these people, despite their war crimes being backed up by consistent witnesses, have been pardoned by President Trump. John Richter, who defended Bahana in court, told the Washington Post, "We know we have a president who is very sympathetic to the very difficult situations that soldiers, sailors, and Marines were put in during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Difficult situations. The justification for the inhuman actions that those soldiers took during the war justified by the implication that we simply cannot imagine the stress that they can be under. That they made the difficult decisions, but in war, sometimes the best of the best just have to make those decisions. And the best always just happens to be us, the West. Even when people go through the proper channels to report such behavior and fight against it, it slips through. And Call of Duty Modern Warfare's story only advocates for this line of thinking, acting as propaganda that supports it. Give more soldiers autonomy, the individual authority to make these decisions, and the world will be a better place. Even if having that autonomy at our current level has only proven torturous to those who may not have been deserving. And we can't kid ourselves when it comes to this being propaganda. The military has funded this series for years, as well as numerous TV shows, movies, and books. This allows the creators to portray the military's many symbols, weapons, and vehicles without risk of copyright infringement. However, the military then also has control over the story being told, advising the writers on what they approve of and don't approve of, which typically results in the military being portrayed as a strong, powerful force for good. The militaries that helped fund the development of this series made absolutely sure that the story of Modern Warfare was the message being portrayed as it is. When we breach into homes and execute authority as we see fit, it's heroic, always justified. Because what if that intel was just around the corner? What if that particular person was going for a detonator? What if that innocent wife and child having a gun pointed at their heads helps the enemy spill the beans on what they know? However, when it isn't the Western forces executing it, It's terrorism. Even if this game is not 100% a recruitment tool, it at least normalizes that mindset so that when we see it in the real world, in our news, we can begin justifying it on their behalf.
But the thing is that people read into that in different ways, right?
Yeah, that's a tough, what do you mean by political?
That doesn't mean anything, right? The question, is this a political game, doesn't actually mean anything.
Our world is surrounded by politics, drowning in it even. And it is understandable to want to avoid it. But pretending that things that are inherently tied with politics will not help. Fans of games and entertainment should recognize not only that modern warfare is political, but as well as much of the industry, and be mindful of what they are consuming, what their media is trying to tell them, whether it is something they support or not, because propaganda is just as unavoidable as politics, and modern warfare's politics are concerning if not outright dangerous, and nobody is immune to propaganda. But just from the few interviews, they were able to skate those messages under the radar. And just with how normalized these specific politics are, everyone just watched and played, and didn't really question whether or not these are views worth promoting. I made this video based off the fascination behind games specifically, but entertainment as a whole trying to dodge politics. Gaming fans specifically seem to be the most volatile in general, but especially when it comes to politics and their entertainment. So this argument is mainly for them, to look at what they're actually consuming and recognize that just about everything is political to some extent. If not political, then it is at least saying something, even if minuscule, about what should and should not be accepted in our society. And Modern Warfare stuck out specifically due to it not only being one of those games that tried to dodge the political label, but also being a game that did that is also propaganda. That, on top of the developers giving their own flimsy definition of what would make it political, spurred me on to create this. Media analysis is one of my strongest suits, so I figured I would put it to use when it came to proving all the points I had to make.